So I want to introduce our first performer. She happens to be sitting next to me, and I've known her something like 38 years. And she's a good friend, a soulmate, and her piece, this is Judy Cowan. Her piece is entitled Fitting In, and we're gonna have to switch places. So she's gotta fit into this seat in order to do her piece. So hang on for a second. And then Judy, bring up your piece.
You're in the screen now. Okay. I've gone to 4 different schools in 2.5 years. That's a lot of changes. Bus routes to learn, new friends to make. It all began when my parents decided that I should go to a better junior high school than the one my inner city elementary school fed into. They didn't want me to be the minority white girl anymore, going to another inferior school. And because we lived out of district of the best school within a bus ride away, my parents gave a distant relative's address as ours. They lived near Bieber Junior High in Winfield. I'm not even sure I've met these people. 3rd cousins, 4th removed, something like that. Walking the 2 blocks to the bus stop to go to Bieber Junior High, January wind whipping around my stockinged legs, I wait alongside the high school girls dressed in their green uniforms. They're all so much older and bigger than my almost 12-year-old self. I look down at the ground, hoping I'll get a seat in the way back of the bus. They'll get off before me on their way to West Catholic High School. And after school, lots of them will change out of their uniforms and they'll put on makeup and they'll tease up their hair and then they'll walk over to the ABC TV station and be on American Bandstand. Oh, are they lucky? A future dream of mine to be fulfilled, but not yet. I'm the 7th grader who's still on the bus, riding much farther than the West Catholic High School girls. The bus ride is a little under an hour, and I ride till the end of the line where it stops in front of Overbrook High School. I walk the several blocks to Bieber Junior High. I'm assigned to a homeroom. I don't know anyone, no one. The homeroom teacher asks, "Who'd like to be homeroom secretary? When someone's absent, they call you and you give them the assignments." My hand shoots up in the air. What a great way to make friends. Betty and Lauren, girls in my homeroom, dressed in identical red plaid pleated skirts and knee-high socks, they walk over to me. "You didn't go to our elementary school." "Nope." "You must be new here." "Yep." We compare lipstick shades, becoming instant friends. The bus ride doesn't bother me so much now that I know the route and I recognize some of the West Catholic girls who ride part of the way with me. All is good. Until the homeroom teacher tells me the guidance counselor wants to see me. Now, why would the guidance counselor want to see me? "Judy?" "Yeah?" "I know you volunteered to be your homeroom secretary. Is this your phone number with the Saratoga Exchange?" "Yeah." "Judy?" "Uh-huh." "Saratoga is a Southwest Philly exchange, not a Winfield exchange. Can you explain this to me?" "Well, it's my phone number." "Where do you live, Judy?" "With my parents and brother." "And where's that, Judy?" 1450 South 52nd Street. "Well, Judy, that's not in our school district. You know that, don't you?" I look at her, tears streaming down my face, and there's no Kleenex anywhere. "Step outside, Judy, and wait on the bench." I'm sitting there, missing class, not sure what's going on, when I see my dad walking down the hall. He never leaves his drugstore when it's open. I'm in deep trouble now. He looks at me, his ice blue eyes peering through his horn-rimmed glasses, nailing me to my seat on the bench. He doesn't say a word. He knocks on the counselor's door and she lets him in. He's been in there a long time. I'm tapping my shoes on the floor, chewing my thumbnail. Dad opens the door, says goodbye to her, and closes the door behind him. Why did you volunteer to be homeroom secretary? Didn't you know our phone number would tell them where we really live? Why did you tell her where we live? I didn't want to lie to her. Sometimes you have to lie to keep what you want. Now get your stuff out of your locker. We're going home. No goodbye to friends, no bus ride, silence in the car. I've been transferred to Lee School. My parents figure that as long as the majority of kids are white, it has to be a better school than where I was supposed to go in the first place. It's 2 bus rides away, farther from home from Bieber. I like that, feeling more independent and away from my parents. Arriving at Lee School, I find my way to the principal's office where my dad told me to report. Mrs. Davis smiles. Judy, welcome to Lee. Let me walk you down to your new homeroom and introduce you to the class. Are you kidding me? The principal is walking me to class? We go together down the hall to the first room on the left. Mr. McBride, class, this is Judy Lutheran. It's her first day here. Make her feel welcome. Hi, I say, wondering where to sit. Mr. McBride points to a seat, and I walk down the aisle, eyes averted, not looking at anyone. Hazel and Jackie, make sure Judy knows where to go next period. Hazel, Jackie, and I nod. Well, we become inseparable, including sleepovers and lots of dancing in front of mirrors, wistfully dreaming about the future debut on American Bandstand, which happens to be only about a mile from Lee School. I'm getting closer in distance, if not in age. Classes seem easy to me. I'm only at Lee 2 months when the guidance counselor wants to see me. Oh no, this can't be happening again. The guidance counselor's office is next to the principal's office. The door is open and both of them are in there. Good morning, Judy. This is Mrs. Brown, our guidance counselor. We'd like to talk to you about how well you're doing here at Lee. Well, yeah, I am getting A's in everything. The only thing I'm struggling with is baseball during gym period. The gym teacher has shown me how to hold the bat and swing, but I'm still not sure if I'm a righty or a lefty. Your teachers and I agree that you're doing so well that you should skip to the next grade. Of course, your parents and you would have to agree to this. What do you think, Judy? Does this mean I'd go from 7th grade to 8th grade right now? Yes, it does. Well, sometimes I think I'm smart. No, clever. I mean, I've figured out the bus routes myself, and I always get to school on time, and I'm getting good grades. Yes, call my parents, tell them. With hardly any discussion, my parents agree. A sweet goodbye to Hazel and Jackie, promises to stay friends forever. We'll see each other in the lunchroom. Once again, Mrs. Davis is escorting me to my homeroom, 8th grade. Whoa, these kids are big. I'm small for my age to begin with, and these kids are all at least a year older than me. As I gaze around the room, I see girls wearing makeup, matching sweater sets, and straight skirts. No pleated skirts. Do I really belong here? I mean, I barely have any curves at all anywhere, and lipstick and slightly teased hair is all my parents allow, though they let me ride the buses myself, change schools and grade levels without much to do. The homeroom teacher, Mr. Brady, smiles at me. Class, make sure Judy knows where to go today. Marilyn, I put you in charge. Uh-huh, I'll take care of her. I know Marilyn. I know who she is. Everybody knows who Marilyn is and wants to be around her. And I get to tag along right beside her. We go to the lunchroom. Judy, uh-huh. Come meet the rest of us. Oh, okay, sure. Here I am with Marilyn, Steve, Kenny, Carol, Susie. Too many names to remember in one lunch period. This is the in crowd. I'm leaving my sleepover friends behind and moving on up. After school, the gang goes to Marilyn's house. As long as I'm home before dark, my parents are okay with me going to Marilyn's after school. We put on 45 records. All of these cool dances I'm learning, the stroll, the twist, calypso, slow dancing with Kenny. I'm really going to be ready for American Bandstand. Graduation from Lee School is coming. I'm here less than a year, and it's time to choose a high school. My parents tell me I can decide where I want to go. Don't they have an opinion? Don't they care? I guess I'll go where my girlfriends are going. I applied to Girls High School, the best high school in the city. Girls High School is a trolley and subway ride away. An hour and a half later, there it is, Girls High, and above the main entrance in Latin, Vincit qui se vincit. She conquers who conquers herself. Well, I've conquered public transportation, getting good grades, making new friends in new schools, and loving the independence from my parents, who don't seem to mind or be concerned about how far away I am at school. Oh, there's Carol and Susie from Lee School. We're going across the street to Esquire Drugs for lunch. Want to come with us? Isn't that cutting? No, you can't cut lunch. It's not a subject, it's lunch. Oh, okay. I pledge a sorority. My parents say okay, as long as I'm home in time for dinner. Mostly we sit around putting makeup on each other and we dance and smoke. It's part of sorority initiation. Well, you want to do it or not? You want to be part of us, don't you? Here, hold it like this and I'll light the match. Get your hair out of the way. Cigarette to quivering lips, I inhale, coughing and choking. They're laughing at me. First time's the worst. You'll see, you really get to like it. You're one of us now. Lunches are getting longer at Esquire Drugs, and there's sorority. Being popular and accepted is way more fun than studying and getting good grades. They aren't A's anymore. They're more like D's. The guidance counselor wants to see me. Not this again. Judy, your grades are not up to our standards. You can either go to summer school to try to catch up or transfer out. I think going to Overbrook High School may be a better school for you. Going home, I'm wondering what my parents will say, what they'll think, who will decide this time. Mom and Dad, the guidance counselor thinks I should transfer to Overbrook in the fall. She thinks I'll do better there. Well, if that's what you want, then transfer. That's it. That's all they say. I'm on my way to Overbrook High School. And once again, I'm waiting for the bus, surrounded by the West Catholic High School girls in their green uniforms. Oh yeah, one day I'm going to be on American Bandstand.
Oh, thank you so much. And I just want you to know that this was Judy's only second piece of personal story writing and performing. She had done it once before, and she's participated acting in community theater for the past 5 years. So thank you, Judy. Wonderful. So next up, a woman who I met about a year and a half ago, Carol Bates, who is just this wonderful organizer, volunteer, humanitarian person. She's just a delight to get to know. And she's going to be presenting her piece called The Color of Tears. So without further ado, here is Carol Bates.
Have you ever spent time in a federal prison? Well, I have. Not because I was in trouble, but because I wanted to. I was approached by good friends from our church to consider being part of a prison ministry, a group of volunteers who would visit and spend time with incarcerated men and women at the Danbury Federal Correctional Institution each week. People who needed a connection to the outside, who needed hope, and the belief there were people who cared for them. Something I'd never thought of doing. Could I really do that? I thought about it, and the more I did, a sense of excitement and anticipation was building, and I knew I just had to sign up for orientation. A lot of scary info about prisons and prisoners, seemingly designed to turn you off of the idea of volunteering, but I was all in. After completing training, the day came to begin visiting with the inmates. After that door was slammed and locked shut, I quickly realized I was in another world unlike mine. The guards checked my name on the volunteer list. I'm searched, my hand is stamped, I get my badge, and I'm ready to go in. Our group is led into the meeting area, and finally, I get to meet face to face with people I had been hearing about from my friends. I was introduced to Jose, Rob, Eduardo, and others. How would they feel about a new member? Would it take time for them to accept me? Doesn't seem so. They actually seem happy to greet me. How is it I'm feeling less trepidation meeting prisoners than I feel in other group settings? Conversations begin immediately. Inmates are talking about their week. Things like, I'm really worried about a new resident. He's not doing well. Trying to get him to join us on Tuesday nights. Another says, having a tough week. No word from home, and I know my dad is quite ill. I quickly learned our lives held many similar challenges: family issues, health, relationships. The evening continued. Our musical group accompanied us as we sang some inspirational songs. There were rousing renditions of Amazing Grace and Stand By Me. What a wonderful night. I was in love. I was hooked. I was already looking forward to our next meeting, and I continued visiting the prison for the next 4 years. As a mother of 4, my heart reacted strongly as I listened to the women inmates talk about the children they had to leave while serving their sentences. Marta worried about her teenage daughter, living without a mother at home during those pivotal teenage years. Thinking of my own teenage daughter being without me, I can only imagine the pain Marta felt worrying about her daughter. I would listen as she told me about her struggles and told her about mine, and I could see her burden lift a little as we sat and just talked, mother to mother. My heart went out to Sandy, a very young inmate. Such a huge part of her life would pass by while she was imprisoned. I looked for her each week and hoped she'd attend, checking in with her, like I'd hope someone would do for me if my own child was in this situation. I just talked to Sandy about her worries, conflicts within the group, her trouble adjusting to prison life, and offered what help I could. But most of the time, I just listened and hoped my presence eased her mind as someone who cared. I'd go home and hug my own children just a little tighter. An eye-opener for me was hearing how frightened some of the inmates were about leaving the facility and worrying about getting back into the same patterns when they were released. One of the men, Jose, actually cried at our meeting before he left. He worried about people who were bad influences and even his home environment, which he knew was toxic. He said, "You know, sometimes I think I'd prefer to stay here to avoid the temptations." Who would ever think walking out of a prison could be just as difficult as walking in? I learned a lot about myself during this time, and one realization stands out in my mind. I loved going to that prison to visit with the inmates, people many would shun. I realized I never looked down on any of the people I met there. My heart was filled with love and caring for the people I met. I looked forward to seeing them each week to hear how they were doing. And even better, they looked forward to seeing me. Their faces would light up, and even if I was having a bad day, walking into that room and seeing those faces, all my problems would disappear, and I was able to listen, offer help, or just understanding and acceptance. I felt my life becoming more enriched each and every week. The only time I was actually frightened to be in the prison happened one December, when our group planned to sing some holiday songs with the inmates in a large common area. Suddenly there was a scuffle. People were shouting as a group of guards with weapons drawn broke up whatever was happening a short distance away from us. I felt myself being moved back, away from the disturbance by strong arms, and looked to see the inmates who were regulars in our group linking arms to make a wall to protect us from whatever was happening. Everything calmed down quickly, and all was well. But it amazed and touched me that these men instantly came to our aid to keep us safe. Is it crazy to think visiting a prison is a wonderful thing? Maybe. But I felt a devotion and thankfulness for what those inmates did for me, a sense of purpose beyond my daily life, to know I was loved by these virtual strangers for just caring about them in their time of need. I would walk out of there each week with a spring in my step and filled with a joy that comes from helping another by just sharing of myself. I'm grateful I had the opportunity to be able to help bring some sense of caring and understanding to those whose lives were so difficult. I'm certainly aware that not all of the people I met changed their way of life. Some may have participated just to get out of their daily chores, but I'd like to think those who came to our meetings to share and be nourished have hopefully gone on to some better things. I think the most powerful life lessons I learned came from a woman inmate named Valerie. She trusted me enough to share her story. One horrible night, her son came home under the influence of drugs, shot and killed her husband as he slept, and then shot Valerie in the face. Half of her face was terribly disfigured, but she was one of the most beautiful people I've ever known, inside and out. She was incarcerated after a painful recovery because she was implicated in drug dealings. She was so sorry for the error of her ways and fought to overcome her demons. She became the surrogate mother of the women's area. She welcomed the younger prisoners and took them under her wing. She said so many profound and wonderful things, and as a Black woman who had lived with racism over the years, she shared many experiences and some of the prejudices that she encountered out of and within the prison system. I know my time in prison and meeting people like Valerie taught me so much about looking for the good in people. One of the things she said I will always remember and speak so directly to our current environment, a reminder to all of us. She said, "We all cry the same color tears. They're clear, no color at all."
Oh, thank you so much.
Are you unmuted now?
Thank you so much, Carol. That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. I also want everyone to know that Carol, in her background, she has presented writings based on personal experience for faith-based retreats as a religious education director for the Catholic Diocese of Bridgeport. And I really get it. That piece was so from the heart. So thank you. Okay, next up we have Terry McDonald. Terry, I got to know Terry 3 years ago. He was acting as the president of the Theater Guild here at Heritage Village. And Terry has probably forgotten more about theater than I will ever know. He is a theater expert. He taught theater at the university level as a professor, I assume. And tonight he is presenting a wonderful piece entitled Hazel McDonald and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. So without further ado, Terry McDonald.
What makes a good day or a bad day? Do you get up thinking, oh, I'll have a good day today, and decide whether you'll have a good day, or you get up and say, oh, I'll have a bad day today? Or do you react to circumstances that happen to you? Sometimes we think we have a choice in the matter. Other time, fate just sweeps us up and takes us to places no one could imagine. For my mother, Hazel McDonald, the day started out to be a typical one. She was getting breakfast for herself and me. My grandfather, Mackie, who recently had a small stroke that affected his balance, was tottering about doing his morning ritual of reading the paper and cutting his fingernails. I was a senior in high school. My mother had already done our new ritual. Because I would lie to her in my sleep when she would call from downstairs asking if I was up, I wasn't up at all, but I answered her, yes, I'm shaving, or that seemed to satisfy her. I went back to sleep and she went into the kitchen to get our eggs done. Suddenly, I heard a huge explosion. My mother started screaming, Mackie, Mackie! I jumped out of bed immediately and ran downstairs. Well, what happened? What happened, I asked. I went to light the oven. By the time I got the match and got it lit, the gas collected and it exploded, Mom replied. Well, I was totally taken aback. Are you all right? I queried. And looking at my mother, I could see that her face was bright pink all over, and her eyebrows were singed, and some of the hair surrounding her face was also singed. I think so, she replied, but I think I should go to the hospital so they can determine how bad my burns are. I got dressed in what seemed like a few seconds, and soon my mother and I were in the car, dressed in our winter coats, hats, and gloves to keep us warm in the cold November air. The day seemed to be getting better. There was very little traffic, and we got to the ER very quickly. The visit also happened to go very quickly. We were in the ER and finished in a half an hour. The doctor said that the burns were not bad and they wouldn't scar, and they put some salve on my mother's face and sent her home. The one good thing about this weird morning, I thought, was that my trip to the ER would get me free from school for the day. But my mother soon put the kibosh on that, and she said, let's go home, and I'll finish making breakfast, and then I'll drive you to school. What? You're gonna make me go to school? I said in horror. Of course, school hasn't even started yet. I'll get your breakfast, and you'll only miss a little bit of school. Go to school. Maybe this day wasn't getting any better at all. Well, I drove us home and we quickly went into the house and we explained what the doctor said to my grandfather, and Mother went into the kitchen to finish making breakfast. I happened to go into the living room. I thought I would turn on the television. However, I noticed that a squirrel was resting in our recliner by the fireplace. It must have come down the chimney. He looked quite comfortable and content. I ran into the kitchen to let my mother know that we had a rodent visitor in the living room. She ran into the living room to see. By this time, the squirrel was out of our recliner and chewing on the wood between the panes of glass in our window over the fireplace. Get the brooms, my mother commanded, and I ran to the broom closet and I got brooms for myself, my mother, and my grandfather. We opened the living room door to the side porch in hopes of driving the squirrel out onto the porch. My grandfather posted himself on the bottom step of the staircase to the second floor, so the squirrel couldn't get up into that floor of the house. My mother made a swing of the broom, and the squirrel. He ran from the fireplace area. Instead of going out on the porch, the squirrel ran into the hallway and then into the dining room and hid. Mother and I made several passes at the squirrel. He ran from the dining room back to the hallway and into the living room. The fresh air pouring through the door to the outside porch did nothing to attract him. We tried several more passes from the living room to the dining room and back, and every time we were in action, Mackie, my grandfather, would fiercely swing his broom back and forth in hopes of keeping the squirrel at bay. Mother, I must say that this day certainly was not getting better. It was turning into Hazel McDonald and a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. And we still hadn't had any breakfast. Let's take a break, Mother suggested, and we did. We were hoping that the squirrel might walk out on its own. It didn't. My mom decided that we needed help, so she called the fire department, and soon a large red fire truck and the captain's car drove up to the house. The fire captain was a very good man, pleasant and eager to help however he could. He was in his 50s, in great shape, and had a shock of thick gray hair. He had one fireman with him, and this man was like the comic relief. Not because he was witty or naturally funny. He was totally afraid. Despite his brawn and his size, when he heard that the mission was to get a squirrel out of the house, he panicked. Those squirrels are dangerous. They're liable to come right at you and start biting. Squirrels are very vicious animals. He went on so much that the fire captain finally told him to go wait outside. Arming ourselves with brooms, the fire captain, my mother, Hazel, and myself set about getting the squirrel to vacate. Mackie took his place at the stairs again. We made 2 passes on the squirrel, who continued to run into the dining room and then back into the living room. We remembered the dining room had doors that could close. The doors had many window panes in each of the doors. We hoped that this would cause the squirrel to run back into the living room and not go in the dining room. However, the squirrel was very smart. A few of the panes of glass had been broken. The squirrel somehow knew this and would leap through the panes of glass that were non-existent. We all forged on. The fire captain, Hazel, and myself. Mackie on the stairs would start swinging the broom anytime anyone made a move, and we kept it up for about half an hour. All the hair on my mother's eyebrows and scalp had fallen into the salve that was all over her face. She was looking like the bearded lady in the circus. The fire captain suggested that we take a break, and we did. As we rested a bit, the 3 of us in the dining room, the squirrel calmly came out of hiding in the living room and walked out the porch door. We quickly closed the porch door and breathed a big sigh of relief. We thanked the fire captain profusely, and he went on his way. My mother told me that since it was 11 o'clock, I didn't have to go to school. Yay! My day finally was getting better. Just at that moment, my grandmother came walking down the stairs. She had somehow slept through most of this. We told her of all that had gone on in the morning, the oven exploding, the trip to the emergency room, the squirrel in the living room, the fire captain coming, and the ensuing chase and resolution. My grandmother smiled and chuckled and said, "Why, this is quite a strange way to celebrate our wedding anniversary." My mother's face had an extreme look of horror on it. I'm sure she would have rather been in Australia. Taking me aside, she moaned, "How am I ever going to put together an anniversary dinner for the 2 of them so late?" Well, ultimately she did fine with dinner. But Hazel certainly had a terrible, horrible, no good, really bad day.
Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you so much. That was delightful. I want to let you know that Terry wrote his first play, a romantic comedy called Rendezvous in Paris, when he was 8 years old. He was very precocious, obviously. Since then, he has written several plays, occasional short stories, but this was the first time he has told his own story. So delightful. Thank you so much, Terry. Okay, up next is someone who I've known for most of my life. A lot of people say that this guy is a pretty good guy. I think he's a pretty good guy too. Some people don't particularly like his jokes, but I like all of them. So yours truly is going to present his piece now, entitled, "What's in a Name?" I meet up with my friend James, a really cool guy I knew from my therapy group who was really into David Bowie, which has nothing to do with this story at all. Anyway, there we are at the 2350 pub on Lincoln Avenue on Chicago's North Side, and we start drinking beer. We order a pitcher of their horrible swill and then another, and maybe a third, who remembers, and we both get stupidly drunk. And one thing leads to another. You know how those conversations go, right? And I conjecture that maybe I should change my name. Why? Well, it just seemed like the right thing at the moment. It took me years to understand what really happened. So there we are, trying out a bunch of ridiculous names, laughing our asses off and making a scene. And then he says, "How about Richard Rain? You know, spell like the watery stuff coming from the clouds." I really like alliteration. I mean, I was an English major in college. I guess I have to explain here that my first name was Richard, so that part wasn't going to be new. But the Rain part, that was revolutionary, and I liked it. And in that drunken instant, I simply changed my name. My family has a history of name changing. I guess that gave my impulse some legitimacy, right? My father had changed his name when he was in his early 30s. He was the firstborn son of a Jewish family living in Brooklyn. So what did his parents call him? Abraham, of course. My family, so my dad's name was Abe Cohn, sort of a Jewish sounding moniker, yes? Actually, the name screamed, "I'm Jewish!" Growing up and going to school in Brooklyn and having a name like that was not uncommon. But when my father got out into the greater world of college and the workplace, it became apparent to him that being so obviously Jewish was a handicap, because in the 1930s, Jews were discriminated against. As my father explained, he wanted to distinguish himself from the boatload of Jews making their way into the business world. His goal was to work on Wall Street, so the obvious choice was to change his name, and he ended up calling himself Alfred Lee Cowan, which did not even whisper, "I'm Jewish." The day after my baptism in beer was a sobering experience. I was teaching at Chicago State University at the time and told the students in my classes that I had changed my last name and they should start to call me Mr. Rain instead of Mr. Cowan. Like good students, they accepted this renaming without question, though I'm sure many of them were chuckling behind their back and probably thought I was more than a little bit screwy. A couple of weeks later, I had an appointment for a new prescription with my optometrist, Dr. Levy. I offhandedly mentioned that I had changed my name and was now going by the name Richard Rain. "Richard Rain? Interesting choice. Why did you choose that name?" I confessed the whole drunken story, though I had no insight as to why I'd done it. Dr. Levy was a wise and kind man, sort of a father figure to me. We talked further. He wasn't judgmental. "Are you certain about the name change?" Not really. I don't see you as being a wet and cloudy kind of guy." And I agreed. Then we tried out different name choices, just like at the pub, only we weren't drinking. And the Rain part started sounding pretty lame. So despite my love of alliteration, he persuaded me that my family's surname was probably a better choice going forward. It had more history, although one generation, as I already explained. "What's your middle name?" "Neil." "How about reversing your first and middle names? You could go by Neil Richard Cowan or simply Neil Cowan." That totally clicked. I walked out of my optometrist's office with a new prescription and a new name. The following week, I returned to my classes and announced that I had changed my last name back to my original one. There are lots of good ways to undercut your credibility, and I had discovered a really good one. I also discovered that changing your name isn't as easy as people may need time to adjust to it. Mostly I was concerned what my parents would say. My mom always called me Richie, and I went by that name until about 7th grade, when I became Ricky, as homage to Ricky Nelson, the cool son in the Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. In college, I shifted to Rick, which seemed edgier and more mature. After college, I used the name Rich for a while, and finally ended with Richard, a more serious name, which I maintained until Dr. Levy's intervention. However, I want to state for the record that in the course of those 32 years, I was never, ever a dick. So my folks were familiar with my tendency to shift my name, but they always called me Richie like I was a little boy. That was just one of the grievances I held against them in our difficult relationship. So when I announced at a Friday night Shabbat dinner that I had reversed my first and middle names, the news was met with questions and challenges, which I, of course, had expected. "Why do you want to do that?" my dad asked. "What's wrong with your name as it is? I just don't understand you." It just seems to be who I am now." "What's wrong with the Richie you've always been?" my mother said. "Why can't you let me make my own decisions? Don't you think I'm capable of directing my own life? Why do you always have to tell me what you think I should do?" They were constantly badgering me about my choices of jobs, girlfriends, schools, plans, future plans. We got into regular pitched battles. So of course, my name change just became one more wedge between us. They were never going to call me Neil. I knew that. There was so much anger and turmoil in my life. I had been a poor student in college and barely graduated, had a failed marriage ending in divorce, and got fired from jobs. I saw myself as a failure and took out my frustrations on my parents, especially my mom. I know I hurt her terribly. What I couldn't see at that moment was that all their questions, commentary, and advice was simply the way they expressed their love. Later that same year, I participated in a spiritual enlightenment workshop, and while in a state of deep reflection, I woke up to who I really am, my real identity. Names didn't matter anymore. I let go of a lifetime of anger and resentment at my parents and the whole world. I went to my mom and dad, apologized to them, and asked their forgiveness for being such a dick and for years of misinterpreting their expressions of love. And then, what do you know? My mom and dad began calling me Neil. They called me Neil. Okay. So, since I'm emceeing this, I just want folks to know that this is the third personal story and performance of personal stories that I've done. I guess I would say that I'm addicted to them, to writing them and performing them. I have another one coming up in September with a different story. And I also have spent the last 10, 12 years acting and directing in community theater. Okay, next up, we have Faith Vichinanza. Faith is an old friend of ours, of Judy's and mine. We've known her probably 30 years, and we moved to Heritage Village because she was living here. And she's a wonderful friend and wonderful artist. So she is going to present her piece entitled The Graduate, not to be confused with the movie. So without further ado, here is Faith Vicinanza.
Thank you. The first time I enter college, I'm 17. Working part-time and living on my own in a small attic apartment that costs $60 a month in a poor neighborhood on Cherry Street in downtown Waterbury. My first year is partially funded by a student loan and a small math scholarship that resulted from the highest score on a math aptitude test of all the high school seniors across the entire state. I tie with a young man whose name I will never learn nor where he is from, and we split the award. I barely turned 17 when I took that exam at the urging of my math teacher, who recognized in me an aptitude for numbers, who wanted me to follow in his footsteps, become another purveyor of the enchantment, the potential obsession with numeric values, algorithms, and theorems. My family had just moved the prior summer 1,500 miles from Florida into a state where course requirements for a high school diploma put me, a senior, into a sophomore history class in my last year of public education, where I sat in the back of the room and read paperbacks in rebellion. I almost failed out of my senior year because of that class and the fact that I had gotten in with a much older crowd before that school year started, when I was 16 and they were mostly in their early and mid-20s. Some of them had been to Nam and back. All of them were drugging and drinking in a way that was off the charts and a ready-made rebellion for an angry teenager. I'm the offspring of two parents for whom education was not only lacking, my father was a dropout, but not even on the radar of those things to encourage, nurture, to hold in some level of esteem. My brother, 5 years younger, dropped out of high school. My sister barely made it through school. No one in my lineage had ever been to college that I know of. All in all, the cards were stacked against me. But school came easy, and it was a refuge of sorts. Even that last year, despite a litany of bad choices, I spent my life to that point consumed by my academics to escape the madness of my home life, enough so that I will stumble unwittingly into my future despite myself. When it is clear I have academic promise, something that occurs to me only at the urging of a teacher and a guidance counselor, my father will have no part of it, because after all, I am a woman. Living on my own at 17, unfortunately, will give way to a rash of reckless decisions and indulgences, too much time spent at the frat house among them, and I leave college before I finish my first year. The first time I go straight, on the heels of an overdose, having downed enough prescription speed, street speed, and a hash chaser to kill a horse, feeling like I could not make my body do the most basic things like breathe. I am 19. My life will not flash before me that night the way one might expect, and if it were not for Joey and Ellen, I would not be sitting here to tell you this story, but going straight won't last. The second time I go straight, because I learn I am pregnant, that is that. I am 21 and I simply stop all of it, the drinking, the drugging, even cigarettes, cold turkey. And it isn't that I am suddenly no longer an addict after 5 years of hanging precariously over the edge by a thread. It is simply that I learn to replace one addiction with another: motherhood, religion, school, food, the gym, cycling, poetry, meditation, gardening, always obsessively striving to be the best at whatever it is I throw myself into. I don't mean to imply that all success is simply the realization of some tendency towards addictive behavior, but, as they say, if the shoe fits. When I enter college the second time, I am 25, living with the father of my toddler son, holding down a full-time job, paying for college out of my own pocket, and I maintain a nearly perfect 4.0 average for 2 years in an aggressive technology program that many students right out of high school will abandon, while volunteering in my second year for the school paper as a writer, school photographer, and production assistant. Like I said, once an addict, always an addict. As an adult, I've been known to create an entire show of my artwork and photography, 30 pieces or more in a matter of weeks. I wrote the first draft of my memoir, 325 pages, single-spaced, in a few months, while working a day job, learning to deal with everything in the house myself as a recent widow, co-parenting a couple of grandkids. And it isn't that being obsessive is necessarily a bad thing, though mostly it is a bad thing. But if you find your way through to the other side, you come to accept, as I did, as I do, that nothing is ever clean and shiny without question in my world. And it's fine. It has to be fine to live inside this unrelenting fog, this propensity towards self-destruction that I sometimes have to give way to and let it burn itself out so I can get on with what really matters, living. At 27, I will graduate with a 2-year degree in computer science. And when I walk across that stage that day, my now husband, my mother, my Tonka truck of a son in the cheap seats at the far back of the auditorium of a local high school, my son standing in his seat so he can see me, will point my way and yell, "That's my mommy." And it will reverberate through the crowd and through me like a church bell.
Whoa. Thank you so much, Faith. That was so beautiful and so heartfelt. And so honest. All these pieces are really moving to me. I want you to know, by the way, that Faith works as a cybersecurity senior program manager by day. She has a full-time job. She's a grandmother, painter, photographer, mosaic artist, poet, memorist, blogger, and she has competed in poetry slams nationally and internationally as well. And so her piece spoke to her life in these ways. So thank you once again. Okay, next up, another wonderful piece by Sarah Duva. Sarah, I've known for a couple of years, well, 3 years now. We shared the stage and doing a play together, and I got to know her somewhat during that. And she's like this super volunteer. She'll just like step forward and she takes risks, and she's just like this powerhouse. And she's got this wonderful story to share with us called Brick and a Pin. So without further ado, here is Sarah Duva. Sarah, are you there? We can't hear you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You might wonder what a brick and a pin could possibly have in common. You definitely wonder how a steady kind of guy and a social butterfly could possibly ever be compatible, let alone fall in love. Our story begins in Town Plot, the Italian section of Waterbury known as the Hill. Growing up in our neighborhood, we'd play football, wiffle ball. It was a great group of kids. As we grew older, our sets of friends changed according to the school we went to. One street away from our street was a big open field, far enough away that we could play football, but still hear our parents call us home. Now, Ronnie was one of the guys in our group. On one of the hottest early fall days while playing football, Ronnie got hurt. He was brought to the hospital, and it was pretty clear that he had broken a bone and would need a pin in his ankle. So with Ron in the hospital, I thought I'd go visit him. I strutted into Waterbury Hospital with my powder blue eyes and my bright pink lipstick. I talked, asked him questions. Well, really, I talked. Ron mostly listened. We talked about things that were going on in the neighborhood. I began to realize I kind of liked this guy. Soon enough, Ron got out of the hospital and recovered, and we saw each other a little bit. But I was still doing what I do best, socializing with friends, always out and about. In the neighborhood, Ron was known as the Rock. You never really broke him. He was always very serious, rarely laughing. I knew that day in the hospital when I got him to laugh, that was my challenge, to break the rock. I wouldn't normally have given a guy like this a chance. My kind of guy was the biker type. Black leather jacket, greased back hair, better known as a hood. I gravitated more toward these guys because they were fun. My friends and I would have a great time with them. We used to meet at Galante's and dance, have pizza, smoke our cigarettes. That wasn't Ron's scene at all. We still saw each other in the neighborhood and on the street, so we definitely still kept in touch. Months after that hospital visit, he asked me out on a date. And of course, my idea of a date was a good time, going dancing and socializing. Where would we go, I wondered. Our date wasn't my usual dancing, socializing, and cigarettes, but we did learn a lot about each other. Ronnie even laughed a few times. Now enter my father, Daddy-O, the bump in the road. Daddy-O didn't think Ronnie was for me. He really wanted someone who was more personable and outgoing. He thought that would be a better match for me. He would always say to me, "Where you gonna go? You gonna go out with him? You're not gonna have any fun." I knew Daddy-O was wrong. Ron didn't show my parents the side of him that he showed me. One-on-one, we'd laugh, we'd talk, we'd have great conversations. After a few more times together, getting to know each other, Ron got his letter. No one was happier than Daddy-O when Ron got hauled off to the service. Daddy-O even found a way to disturb Ronnie from afar, knowing all too well that Ronnie was not allowed to receive packages from home. Daddy-O sent Ronnie a box of cookies. Ronnie's drill sergeant made sure that Ron enjoyed the cookies and made sure that he washed them down with several glasses of hot water. You can imagine the gastric event that followed. Oh, but Daddy-O's happiness was short-lived. 1 month into basic training, Ron was honorably discharged. Remember that pin in his ankle? Well, in 1965, you couldn't be in the Marines with a pin in your ankle. That turned out to be a good thing for me. He got home from the Marines and I graduated high school. We picked up where we left off. Daddy-O still wasn't convinced. In my father's eyes, he wanted someone for me who came from a more prestigious family. His idea of a good family. In Ron's case, that wasn't going to happen. Anyway, no one would have been good enough for his daughter. And isn't that the case for every Daddy-O? Throughout the beginning of our relationship, Ron and my father tolerated each other at best. It took a lot of patience on Ron's part, but things did get better. Ron did show my dad that he was the guy for me. He was now working in the Postal Service, doing many things to make inroads to foster their relationship. My father was glad that Ronnie was a positive influence on me. Not that he had to be. I settled down. I was not so crazy. I began taking things a little slower. Not that anyone needed to worry. My mother, though, was the voice of reason. She was the one that helped convince Daddy-O that Ron was all right. She realized that he was good for me. He treated me very well, and I was happy when I was with him. At the end of the day, that's what mattered the most. So now our relationship is progressing, and we're getting more serious. I thought it'd be fun to ask, when I visited you in the hospital, what did you think of me? He said, hospital? What about the hospital? Never really thought about that. Well, didn't you get excited when you saw me? Yeah, excited, well, maybe. But really, all I was thinking about was how I was going to manage in school with these crutches. So much for my perfect beehive hairdo. So now I'm thinking, what the heck was it? When did you know I was the one? You're thinking it was your beehive hairdo, the pink lipstick, or the powder blue eyeshadow? I'll tell you what it was. It's that sassy attitude that made me laugh. Well, then I would say I really did break the rock. Okay, now that I've painted this great picture of Ronnie, I have to tell you why he really wanted to marry me. So he told me that he would look across the street at my house, the only brick house on this street, and he thought, Italians don't use banks. There must be one loose brick in that house, and that's where Daddy-O stuffed the money.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. That was wonderful. Thank you. I want you to all to know that this, believe it or not, this was Sarah's very first effort at writing and telling her own story. She's performed on stage in community theater, as I said, but this was her very first writing outing. So wonderful. Thank you so much. Great job. And finally, last but certainly not least, Elizabeth Thomas is our last performer. And I have known Elizabeth probably 20 years more than 20 years. She and I got together when we worked on teen poetry slam teams. She's a wonderful poet, a published poet and performer, and a wonderful teacher, has worked in schools with writing and poetry for years and years and years. And her thing is she believes in being out loud and in person. She's a performer who believes in being out loud and in person. So without further ado, I give you Elizabeth Thomas with her piece, Play Ball.
Challenger baseball, or buddy ball as we all called it, was a program sponsored by the town I lived in years ago for children with physical disabilities. Each player needed a buddy to assist them in the game. We should have been tagging second base, but instead, Andy was crying so hard I had to wheel him out of the ball game and take a break behind first base. This was not the Andy I had come to know as our team's star batter and my friend. In between sniffles and hiccups, he told me he'd been to his doctor's office that day and might have to have surgery on one of his legs. He was sad and frightened and needed a hug. A 12-year-old with cerebral palsy, Andy possessed an amazing capacity to see the best in everyone he knew and help others recognize how much we all have to offer. The other young players, each with their own disabilities, had come to rely on him to boost their spirits when down and to hit a home run when the score was down. This was not a typical day at Buddy Baseball. When Andy and I finally looked up from our hug, there sat Dougie, a beautiful child with a radiant smile and remarkable sensitivity to the pain of others. He was born without arms or legs, and through determination and some magic of technology, he was able to operate a wheelchair using a lever in the middle of the seat, snug a bat between his shoulder and chin, and he could also hit a home run, as well as catch high pops in a baseball cap held by his teeth. Today, he looked at Andy and asked what was wrong. Andy hiccuped again and finally stuttered, "The doctor says he may have to operate on my leg." And with his composure completely gone, Andy went back to sobbing. Dougie paused. He looked at me, and then he looked at Andy and simply said, "I wish I had a leg." Andy became quiet. Still sniffling softly, he tilted his head to one side, took a deep breath, and looked at Dougie. "You're right," he said. Wiping his nose, Andy smiled. "Come on, let's go eat a piece of pizza while it's hot." I took a deep breath, wiped my own nose, as each young boy, thinking only of food, headed toward the pizza truck. About a year later, I was telling my elderly mother this story. She looked at me, shook her head. I said, "What, Ma? You don't like the ending?" No, she said, "it's not that. I'm just thinking what everyone else must think when you tell them this story." "What's that?" I asked, completely baffled. "Well," she said, "how is that boy going to eat a piece of pizza?"
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was such a sweet story.
Thanks.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to know that each of these tales were came from the heart, and we